All right, and we are recording. Welcome everybody to another episode of News on China Behind the Headlines. This is our fourth episode, but it's about the 100th time we've changed the name. But I think we're going to settle on this one, right? I think this sounds good. All we know is it's episode 4 between us, but I think we got this one now. I think this is the right name. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so should we print the t-shirts already? Put the
Yeah,
face
you
of Daniel
gotta
Dumbrell.
refund the T-shirts and say that, and then on the new T-shirts say these T-shirts cost twice as much as we planned because Daniel changed the name on us last minute. Uh, and we missed an episode, but this time it was not because you guys were on the beach drinking pina coladas. We gotta make that clear. That was my fault this time. I was on a bit of a road trip through Hunan and Anhui. I uploaded a couple of videos on that, but
That's great.
we're back. Yeah, we're back now. And then we're going to try to do this regularly, film it at least on Monday, and then get it out at some point during the week as we get into a normal schedule. So, how about we just start before we start chatting? We start with the video, yeah.
Let's go.
All right, let's start with the summary video. I'll load that up now. All right, there we go. There is our. It was supposed to be a 60-second video, but it was 1 minute and 2 seconds. I don't know what happened this week.
We talk too much, even in videos.
Yeah, there was too much to fit in. Yeah, that's more than I was going to say 20% over. That's more than 20% over. But never mind. It was a good video, so we're okay with it. So yeah, how about we get into? We're gonna not necessarily talk about exactly what we saw in the video there, but you've got a bunch of headlines prepared for us that you do want to talk about. So what do you want to start with?
So we want to start with one key topic of the last couple of weeks since we've chatted. That's the 2 sessions that happened between 4th and the 11th of March, or also known as Lianghui. So, what is this? This is an interesting name. Many people, I think, outside don't necessarily know what that means, but it's a gathering of the top 5,000 political, also business, also social leaders of the country into 2 back-to-back sessions. So the first meeting being the advisory meeting of the what's called the CPPCC, and then the top legislative body, which is the National People's Congress. The idea is that these 5,000 people gather to debate some of the key issues from the last year, and also the many proposals that have come out being collected through the course of the year. So in this year, I think almost 6,000 proposals are collected during the year, and a selection of those gets debated at the national level. And then also looking at the way forward. One key aspect is that this year, as 2021, is marking the first year of the 14th five-year plan, which we've covered in the News on China. That takes us into 2025. So that was one of the key things, looking at the social and economic policy moving forward. We're not going to touch too much on that specifically, but a couple of the key announcements we'll dive into more. And I think it's important also in this context to remember that the 2 sessions are happening in a global geopolitical context too, where we know the country where we should not name, though the leaders have changed, we have all indications that both the new President Joe Biden in the U.S., and its Secretary of State Anthony Blinken have said pretty clearly that it'll carry on the same policies as the Trump administration. So path of trade war, sanctions, but perhaps with a little bit more effectiveness, let's say, in rallying its allies. So we've seen a lot of that movement happening whether through the Quad countries, through G7 nations, through NATO, and more against China. So we're probably going to be seeing more of that, not any less.
Right.
So within that, there's two, I guess, key announcements we wanted to focus on briefly in terms of how China's going to confront some of its own challenges, both in terms of domestic consumption, its economy, and then also how to meet some of its shortcomings, especially in terms of the technological industrial side. So,
right,
yeah. I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You.
Yeah, no. I was just going to say on the topic of nothing's going to really change in terms of the general direction. I know we were joking around in the first episode of not mentioning the U.S. directly, but it's very hard not to. So, yeah, I know that there's a conference that's supposed to be coming up in Alaska where it's supposed to be a relationship reset meeting. It's pleasing to hear that something like that's happening. I'm not very optimistic about it. I think they've chosen the path that they want to go down. And it was interesting because I think during these same sessions, Xi Jinping had said that one of the biggest threats to China's stability and growth is the United States. And there was somebody who tweeted that out and said, he was an American. He said, look at this. He says, if you weren't already afraid, now's the time to start being afraid. Look at how China's speaking. And it's like, actually, what's wrong with that? The United States is the biggest threat to the stability and growth of almost every nation on earth, especially if you're in the global south. So it was like, it was interesting to see Americans see it from that context, saying, oh my gosh, how could they say something like that? Because it's true historically as well through all of these countries that have been exploited, especially in Latin America. But we'll see what happens. I mean, one of the other things that really drives home that point also is, I don't know if you saw, I retweeted an LA Times reporter who's in Syria saying he's with the U.S. military protecting the oil fields in Syria. And it's like, wait, what? It's like, and it's like, and I tweeted the video of literally outside of the oil fields. There were basically homeless Syrians digging through the garbage, it's like they're not there for human rights. They're there for the oil, and it reminded me of a tweet that I sent out before while Trump was still in power, and he said, we're there in Syria, we're protecting the oil, we're keeping the oil, we're there for the oil, I like oil, like he was saying, and people were like, oh my gosh. I'm like, no, guys. This isn't a Trump thing. This is an America thing, but he's just saying the quiet bits out loud. He doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. And so as you can see now, LA Times reporter, without any sense of irony or shame, is saying, I'm here, helping with the U.S. troops, the brave U.S. troops protecting Syrian oil. It's like, a little bit of a tangent there. The gloves came off, but hey, important context for what you're saying, because when people just say that, they say, you know what, the U.S. has already made up their mind. This is the way it's going to be. It doesn't matter if it's left or right. There's so many stories and context to that as to why that's such a true statement. But anyways, I digress. We can continue on unless you have some more thoughts.
No, it's actually about that, and it's good that you mentioned the meeting this week. This 2+2 meeting. It's like a top diplomats from both sides. But I mean, as we know, probably there's some negotiations, but it's clearly like the mood and the U.S. strategy. I think it's very clear by now. So that's also requires of China probably much more planning, much more strategic thinking. And so that was interesting to see during this week the two sessions how many, because of course, I mean, China had huge achievements in the last 40 years and huge achievements in the last 10 years. So of course that there's a whole the big narrative all around that, oh my God, China, they are doing great. They are the best. But they know how much limitations they still have. So this is interesting to see during the whole week, and many of the debates, even the articles that we could read in the press, both in China and outside of China, was also outlining some of the biggest challenges that China is going to face now. Of course, as you said, probably the U.S. is the biggest one, but they also have internal ones that they have to deal with. So for instance, like they, first of all, they set the GDP target for this year. which was a big discussion last year. Oh, should we or should we not set a target? At the end, they set for 6%, which is a very cautious target, actually. If you see, for instance, the IMF expectation is 8.1% for China. Even some banks in Hong Kong are saying that could reach 10%, but they're being cautious. So, because one of the limitations, for instance, and this is one of the topics we published this week, is that they are still very dependent on both finance sector, as all of the economies in the world, the major economies in the world, but also the real estate sector. The real estate sector, for instance, has a very direct influence in one of the other challenges that China has, which is the domestic consumption. Because as we know, there was a big increase of spending of the families in housing in the last years because of the real estate speculation, the hiking of the prices. So just to have one data, between 2002 and 2018, the spending of with housing for the families grew from 8 to 13%. So this is it's almost double the amount of money that people have to spend with housing in China, which means this is less money to consumption. So there's another interesting data also regarding big cities like Beijing and Shanghai, which you have this is one of the biggest problems is house prices. So between 2013 and 2019, the ratio between consumption and GDP, which means how much of the GDP in China is consumption, decreased. In Beijing, decreased 7.9%, and in Shanghai, 6.4% less. But the national average was 3.6, which means like these two cities are, I mean, it's a big deal. People have to spend more and more with housing, and this is less money to consumption, and this is a big problem to the economy as a whole.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted problem, isn't it? Because it's not only about this takes up spending elsewhere, but yeah, I mean, it's created an unbelievably quickly increasing house market prices. It's just out of control. I mean, most people in the cities have a difficult time of even imagining having, buying a property. And that it was in part because of the lack of other options. I mean, that's what people do. They buy an apartment, then they want to get another one, and then they want to try to get another one. This is like the ultimate thing. Probably the capital controls in China doesn't help that either, because it's difficult to get renminbi in and out of China. So it's pretty much to here. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they open up other options and potentially bring down the house prices a little bit. Because this is this is what I've always said too. It's one of the biggest challenges. If young people can't afford houses anymore, I mean, then that's when you start having problems. But then how do you bring the property prices down also without angering all of the people who put so much investment into property?
Exactly.
Potentially by easing them into other investment opportunities might be a good solution, but we'll see how it goes. It's a tricky problem to solve.
It is because also, for instance, even the Chinese state is still very reliant on the taxes from real estate. So for them, it's also, I mean, they know that this hurting the economy, they're hurting the consumption of families, but they also rely on that to have more money as a national budget. So that's Xi in 2017, I guess, right? He said, houses is to live, not to speculate. So this is, I mean, it draw the line. But even though we know it's a very complex problem, you don't just solve like in a few years or in a few, like with a few measures.
Yeah.
And of course, with the pandemic.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, that's something we published last a couple of issues ago. Also, with the pandemic, the increase on the dependence of the real estate has been even increased as a source of tax revenue for the government.
Exactly.
But go ahead, Dale.
Yeah. And when the prices come down, if they do manage to bring them down to a reasonable level, or if they don't, one way or the other, there's going to be a group of people upset. It's either and one group of people happy, a group of people who can now afford a home, and a group of people who are losing out on a lot of value in the property that they hold. But we'll see how it goes.
So
All
on the
right.
flip
So
side of this, other
yeah.
element we want to bring in is that, okay, so Marco's bringing in the challenges of increasing domestic consumption. We've been hearing about that for quite some time. The second part is around the technological self-reliance towards the plan that was announced last year, the strategic plan on Made in China 2025. So in the two sessions, Premier Li also presented a work plan, and in it was some priority areas for technological industrial development, everything from robotics to agricultural machinery. We're looking at other strategic sectors like satellite systems, smart cars, rare earths, which we'll focus a bit more on afterwards. And interestingly, within this, we published an article that included an interview with former Minister of Industry, Miao Wei. So he was saying, it seems surprising to hear that despite being the world's largest manufacturer, China became the world's largest manufacturer in 2010. And last year, it made up almost 30% of the global manufacturing output. Despite this, he suspects that China is still about 30 years behind in terms of the manufacturing power of Western nations like the US and Germany, and indicating some of the shortcomings in the manufacturing sector. He points to a few things in this interview that we published. Is that one of the aspects is this declining market share or declining share of the GDP of the total economy contributed by the manufacturing sector. So it's been steadily declining down to 37.8% last year.
So just one thing.
It seems like a lot for China.
I almost laughed because the Chinese, they are worried that the industry now is only 37.8% of GDP. I think it was 39 in 2019. So Brazil is around 10% right now. If you go to South Africa, it's 9. If you go
putting that into perspective, that is, quite interesting. So they're going to put a lot of effort into one of the earlier things you were talking about was focusing on kind of filling in the gaps on where they're weaker in terms of technology, satellite, and stuff like that. Chip making obviously is going to be a really big thing. That's something they've learned that it's a pretty. They would have been. I think they would have been happy for quite a long while more in relying on foreign chips. But when they saw how vulnerable they were, when a trade war or a conflict start, they know this is something we've got to solve. What would be interesting too, I don't know if there's a tie-in for this, is that could be potentially, if this is a state-run initiative, giving investment opportunities to people to invest in it, kind of like a pre-IPO kind of a stage, investing in the future of satellite technology, AI, and all this stuff behind these state-owned initiatives. That would be
crowdsourcing.
I would imagine. I would imagine a lot of people would even want to sell their property to say, I want to invest in this.
Crowdsource for chip making. I mean,
but don't do that, because if too many people sell the properties, the price will go up again.
Well, I mean, eventually there's very few people here who are just happy with renting, compared to other societies, especially if you compare it to Germany. If you look at the statistics, there's a lot of people who don't want to own a property. They just want to rent. But that's not something, I mean, having a piece of land, having a property, an apartment is such an important thing for people here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We'll see how and if that changes.
And so, of course, like you mentioned the chips, I mean, that's I think the word about self-reliance is super key in this moment. We framed it in the geopolitical context. I mean, we've already talked a lot about chips, but China being the largest market, but importing 80% of its chips, it's felt the brunt of when the trade war hits and when sanctions hit, how vulnerable it can make your own supply chains. And still, it's years behind. I mean, from all kinds of predictions, it's still years behind. Another aspect I think this minister brought in that was interesting is also the lower labor productivity across various sectors. And I was quite surprised to see, for example, in steel compared to the US, China is about 50% of its productivity compared to, or just over 50% compared to the US. In the chemicals industry, it's at even less. It's about 10 or 11%. So there's some key sectors still, as much as it is by volume, the largest producer. In many areas, the strength in its productivity is still not at the level of these most advanced industrial societies. And so within that, one of the key things coming out of the two sessions is prioritization of research and development investment. Just as a sense, like the last kind of global statistics comparing across country, comparing R&D investment against GDP, China ranked only 18th in the global standings. About 2.4% is being spent of the GDP. And so just to give a comparison, countries like Israel and South Korea are about a bit more than double of what China spends as a percentage of its GDP. So the big announcement here is that until 2025, which is the end of the 14th five-year plan, China will be increasing its R&D investment 7% annually to a total of 580 billion. But it's still quite short of the investment it needs. And of course, our research and development is many specific areas it has weaknesses in.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's going to be interesting to see what kinds of new technologies we see coming out of China. I mean, you already have them on the leading edge of so many things already, and that's with them recognizing that the R&D spend is nowhere near it should be. So imagine when they pump this much more money into the R&D sector, what they're going to create. I mean, it's going to create so many more products for America to sanction, like DJI. You know, that's the thing, isn't it? Because it's like, why doesn't China make their own products? So we think they're copying this, copying that, and then all of a sudden they come out with the best 5G stuff. They come out with the best consumer drones, and it's like block. You know, so there's going to be
keep their lawyers busy.
Yeah, but yeah, go ahead. You were going to say you go ahead.
No, it's just that one of the weak points. For instance, they have been discussing the last years is the problem of basic research, which actually, I mean, most of the research and the development budget goes for so-called applied research. So it's more concrete, practical things that you have to get a device better, more efficient, etc. But there's a lot of the most important thing, it's basic research. Who you start researching, you don't know if it's useful or not, but you know there are things there in the future that you need to increase the capacity of many sectors of the economy. So that's one of the problems of China, because right now, last year, China spent of the whole budget for R&D, China spent 6% in basic research. Mm-hmm. Just for a comparison, US spent last year 18% of its R&D budget in basic research, and China is actually pointing or having a plan for by 2025 wants to spend 8%. So in 5 years, we'll still be not as high as it's needed. So this is one of the things that they had to. There's also interesting interview this month from Ran from Huawei, the CEO of Huawei. Mm-hmm. He gave a very interesting, like a long interview to South China Morning Post about many of these aspects, but pointing out this is one of our weakest issues today. We need to, if we don't advance in that, we're not going to be able to catch up with some of the most high-end technologies that we need.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea to ease into it as well, because if all of a sudden you try to go up to the same level, you're all of a sudden going to get young entrepreneurs living in co-living spaces, making TikTok videos about when they drink coffee and what their day looks like. I don't know if you've seen any of these. What the average day looks like for a content creator or whatever it is. 8 a.m., drink my coffee. 9 a.m., sit around, and discuss worst pitch ideas. It's actually kind of entertaining, but yeah. So no,
we need more than that.
Yeah. Now, okay, so yeah, what do we have next on the list here then?
Okay, so now so US has chips. So it's sort of like the ace on the sleeves, and it became a weapon for the US against China in the last year. But you know what? I mean, China is not phrasing it this way, not framing this way, but China has a sort of a chip too. It's not so high-end technology, but it's critical for high-end technology, which is called the rare earth. Oh, okay. Rare earth, there's a lot of us never heard about rare earth. It's sort of like a weird name because actually it's not rare and it's not earth, but actually rare earth is all around you. All the electronics, electric cars. I mean, it's using so many, of course, in the military industry, the jets. We have been talking a lot about renewable energy. So solar panels are rare earth. The wind energy needs to use that. What is rare earth actually? This is actually a group of 17 elements that is actually abundant in nature. Some of them more than copper, for instance, but it's very dispersed. So this makes the process of production very complex. Some names, just for you guys to know, neodymium.
We were practicing before.
Yeah,
Neodymium. Praseodymium.
Terbium, dysprosium, anyway, things that we never heard about it, but our lives depends heavily on them, more and more.
Yeah. I think I've heard a few of those names in Star Trek, but that's about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
what happened is that.
Yeah.
Go.
So what's going on now with that? No.
No,
I was
actually,
going to ask you what's next.
Yeah, I mean, basically, there's an interesting situation in the global market right now. Mm-hmm. Basically, China dominates the market. 80% of the production of rare earth. Oh, that's a good point. You can see, this chart. This is a production since the 1960s until 2019. So you see the comparison between US and China, especially since the 90s. What happened is that China in 1990, China had 27% of the market. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, President Jiang Zemin and the whole leadership, they realized, this is going to be one of the most strategic materials in the future. So we need a plan for that. We need to become not only self-reliant, but we need to dominate this market.
And that was in the 90s as it was quite low right there, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It was 27% China production in the 90s, as we can see here in the chart. Right. So since then, using many methods of planification or planning, quota for productions, quota for exports, during many years in the 2000s, China actually, what they did, there was many small, medium-sized companies. They acquired, state companies acquired, so they sort of merged many of these companies in huge SOEs. So with that, they were able to turn the game, and now they have 80% of the market. And guess what? US is hugely reliant on China. The US right now actually needs to import 100% of its rare earth. Well, but imagine. Yeah, exactly.
You know what's interesting for me with that? Well, you know what's interesting for me that I'm surprised that China didn't do this because Canada did this, and a lot of people think, when you're safe when you're U.S.'s ally. No, you're not. So what happened during the pandemic was all of the hospitals in Canada used to get their 3M N95 masks from 3M, which was shipping out of the U.S. And the Trump was basically the U.S. government was trying to block 3M from sending any masks to Canada, basically leaving Canadian medical workers without any masks. They don't get them from anywhere else. That's where they get them from. And then Canada, a Canadian politician, gently reminded the U.S. where the material comes from for those N95 masks. They come from, I think it was Alberta. It's a kind of a pulp mill. And they're like, okay, yeah, no problem. We've got, guess where the materials come from. And then they were like, okay, we'll supply them. So even Canada had to do that. The U.S. bullies everybody, not just their enemies. They bully everybody.
No, exactly.
But China, I'm surprised they didn't use that angle sooner. I mean, if things get really tough, maybe they will, and they'll be like, okay, guys, you want to play this way? But they haven't done that yet. Yeah.
No, that's one big question, because I don't know, for instance, if you saw last year, when Lockheed Martin signed a huge contract with Taiwan to upgrade their missiles and some of the defense system, China actually threatened to put a sanction on Lockheed Martin and stop exporting rare earth to them. Nothing happened so far. If you see the last weeks, this is one of the hot topics of geopolitics. You can see both in Chinese media, US media, European media, everybody's discussing this now. Because, of course, they're just saying, China will sanction us. China will shut off the exports. What China is saying now, the speecher said, no, it's okay. This is a big market. We need to do it. But you can see in the underline some of, I don't know, some Global Times articles, some other sources in China. They're also signaling that, okay, if this this trade war, this sanctions, if it goes too much, we might use that. We don't know. This is something. This is just rumors. But objectively, China has this power. Today, China can just shut off the U.S. Imports, and then they would basically collapse. Imagine all the military industry depends on rare earth. So without that, they would be in a hard.
And I mean, as a sign of good faith too, and China's response was not, when there was all this fear mongering around to say, oh, now China will retaliate. They're like, actually, we're going to increase our production quota. Just a couple of weeks ago, we're going to increase it by 27%. Obviously, some of these questions of what end uses it will go to, but it was also an act of goodwill, I'd say.
It's interesting.
We're not closing anything right now.
It's interesting, their reaction, though, to even the possibility of being sanctioned. You'd think that they don't think sanctions are a very nice thing, which is what they do to everybody. But the problem is when they're sanctioning other countries, it's not about their military companies not getting access to the materials they need. It's about ordinary people not getting access to medicine and food and stuff like that. There's so many opportunities for reflection in the U.S., but it's like it goes over their head. It's like, whoo, sanctions! How dare that? Sanctions are a really bad thing. Oh, really? Huh. I'm glad we've come to this point.
So, and this actually, and I mean, this issue will just become more and more hot, because imagine electric vehicles. We have discussing that. It's going to grow massively in the next years. I mean, you don't do electric vehicles without rare earth. For instance,
is lithium on the list of rare earths?
No, actually not. No, it's some other materials that are part of the batteries, but it's not lithium. Because they are everywhere. For instance, they are called the MSG of industry, rare earth. Because I mean, almost everything, even glass. We don't know that, but a big part of the glass, it's rare earth. So I mean, it's everywhere. So for instance, right now, the China's production of rare earth last year was 150,000 tons. So
and consumption, because they produce so many things.
Exactly, production and consumption. So this is set to double in 5 years. So by 2025, they probably have 300,000. And so, of course, this would be one of the most important geopolitical topics in the next years. As the chips are, now we're going to have a lot of specialists in rare earth in the next years, because this is really a big deal now.
I mean, it's interesting you brought in the 3M thing, like, Daniel, because of the, how U.S. treats its allies, and then how in this moment is trying to win back its allies, because Canada actually is one of the big producers, not in necessarily volume, but has the most rare earth projects of any country in the world. So there's probably going to be more leaning towards Canada to help them, because to be honest, U.S. has had one functioning rare earth mine in California called the Mountain Pass, and just the company Moly Corp basically just collapsed last year because it had a debt of 1.7 billion. So the one production that they had, so like this is the huge decline we're seeing in that map, that graph you showed since the 90s. So now they're also going to Australia. There's this company called Linus that is the only non-Chinese company that has some capacity to produce, but at the same time they almost bankrupted a few years ago if it wasn't for a Japanese SOE that came in, swept in and helped them. And they just did a joint project with Linus between U.S., Pentagon funded it, and a project in Texas. So they're trying to win their allies over, but the production is far and few between to be able to meet. Because the thing that Marco said, or like the Latin Americans love to use, planification, like light, nice long words, what we call state planning, is that doesn't exist. Whether it's your allies, the allies of Canada or Australia, Quad countries, or wherever else, definitely not the U.S. So they have a huge, let's say, they're a disadvantage. Even their allies are going to are not faring much better either.
Yeah, well, one last thing about that is that I think the example of rare earth and what happened to China and what happened to U.S. and what's happening right now. By the way, you guys saw there was a meeting of the Quad last week. So they are trying to rearrange this alliance: U.S., Australia, Japan, and Australia, India, Japan, and U.S. against China. So this is one of the topics of the meetings. They are trying, as Ting said, they're trying to reorganize the production. But I think the last point would be, I think this is a good lesson about how the market works and what is the difference between a free market economy and a state planned economy. Because what happened is that if you read the specialists, all of them say it's going to be very hard for US or Canada or Australia to compete with China at this point. Not only because of size of the production and the capacity that China has, but because rare earth is a very complex process production that needs huge investments, like billions of dollars, and it's very hard to get like private investors because it's also very risky. You don't know. I mean, it's not so. I mean, this is a plan for 10, 20 years. It's not something that you're going to make money in 1 or 2 years. So right. This is one of, even if you see the specialists in the Western countries, they're saying, guys, you guys grew up. You should have done this 20 years ago. It's not going to be easy because who is the state? Is U.S. state or Australian state? They are really like banking this. It's not clear so far. So this is one of the advantage that China has. And at this point, the dimension of production is so big that China also would have some mechanism of the market also to smash the competitors. So this is I would say like between the so-called invisible hand of the market and the visible hand, rare earth is a clear case where the visible hand were much more efficient than the so-called invisible hand of the market.
Right. Yeah. I think. Well, so I've heard also that Afghanistan has a lot of rare earth potential. There's a lot of rare earth deposits there. So maybe the U.S. will continue to show interest there. Obviously, Bolivia is somewhat off the table in terms of it, electing a socialist leader who wants to nationalize the country's resources and not give too cheap of access.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been an interesting lesson in economics, and all we need now is Australia or Canada to elect an overly socialist government, and then you're going to get a lesson in geopolitics. That's a bad combination. Valuable resources and a socialist government. you got a target.
Exactly. This is China.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I remember, thinking about all these things. When I was a kid, they used to say that the next wars would be fought over fresh water. Which was probably a little bit of an over-exaggeration in the short term, at least, but it still is about natural resources, a lot of these conflicts. So
exactly.
We'll see where it goes.
And 20% of the world's fresh water is in the Great Lakes of Canada. So if there was a chance for socialism there, but I think it won't be in our lifetimes.
Yeah. So now you had something, I'm not sure if it's part of this story, the rare earth prices have... So the rare earth prices were going up initially as China was tightening. But that was before. Now they've said they're going to increase production. Those are two separate timelines?
Actually, what's going on in the last months? Exactly. What's going on in the last months is that first of all, there's increasing of demand. I mean, you can imagine from electric vehicles to electronics to military. I mean, there's a huge increase of demand in the last months. But also China also is announcing new regulations because it's a very complicated market. There's also a lot of environment issues. We didn't touch that, but it's also very harmful for the environment. So one of the challenges in the next years is how to decrease the harm to the environment because it's still it's very complicated. So China is issuing new regulations for the production. It's raised the quota of the production, but also some new laws on the restrictions of exports. This is what is getting the Western powers very nervous about it. Yeah.
Right.
But usually the prices are because there's expectation of, as I said, it's the production will double production consumption in the next 5 years. So this is also making the prices go high because the investors know that, okay, this is going to be a very big business. And also Myanmar, because Myanmar is is the third biggest reserve. It's China. US is a big reserve, and the third biggest reserve is Myanmar. And because of the political situation, yeah, this is also creates some instability and some anxiety in the market because they still don't know how the new government will deal with exports to China. Actually,
that'll be interesting to see the reactions of China tightening the controls on production, but reducing the amount that they export, out of environmental concerns. Because it was always interesting that the West, obviously, when they industrialized, they had massive consequences to their environment. Then they started exporting those requirements and consequences to China, while simultaneously complaining about the environmental situation in China. But I would imagine that those same people they're going to be more concerned about the economic side, saying, why, they're not giving us minerals anymore. Say, well, hold on a second. They're reducing the mineral production out of environmental concerns. Didn't you say that this is what you're concerned about? So for now, they'll produce what they need themselves. It'll be interesting to see how, yeah.
Yeah, no, they're actually increasing the quota production. They're increasing, but they know that the environmental issue is a challenge. So, for instance, part of the research in rare earth in the next years, it's going to be about how to get the process more efficient and less harmful to the environment. That's one of the key topics.
So the production increase, though, I would imagine if they're going to be tightening the exports, what I'm saying is then that the amount, it wouldn't make sense to overstock this stuff while they're trying to figure out the environmental aspect. So I think, especially with all of this R&D and all of this new stuff, all the new stuff they're going to be doing in terms of focusing on electric power, chip making and stuff like that, the production is increasing, I would imagine, and I could be wrong on this, in unison with how much China needs to use for themselves, unless they're planning on actually stockpiling it. So if they were going to produce enough for their own increasing demand, plus also do exports, I would imagine that it would mean an even bigger production and mining requirement. But I'm not sure. I'm making some assumptions here.
No,
absolutely. Because it's both what Marco said around the making increasing by 5 times. It's lumped together with consumption and production because most of the consumption is its own production anyway. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All
so
right.
Big deal for the next years. Be prepared.
Yeah. Things happen so quickly here too, so it's not like we have to wait too long to see how all this plays out. All right. So do we have a different topic now? Do we or?
Yeah. We have one more topic that's from our last week we want to touch on because we missed our week while you were sipping pina coladas. So we want to bring it back, especially for the March 8th, the International Women's Day that passed last year. So do you have that second video that you can show us?
There were 2 videos?
Yeah. I don't know if you got that one. From the 41st edition.
From the previous one?
Yeah.
I don't have that, but what we'll do is after this,
sure,
we're at the 43-minute mark, I will slip it in, and then we can continue talking. Yeah. So
perfect.
Go ahead, yeah.
All right, so we want to bring a few women's achievements, especially because it was the March 8th, International Women's Day. We want to put the working women back in International Women's Day, like its origins were. So the first story was this landmark court victory that happened, which is basically that a woman got paid compensation for all the unpaid domestic and care work that she did in her previous marriage, a 5-year marriage. So it's a Beijing former couple. The husband filed for divorce in 2015, but he hadn't pretty much shouldered any of the housework or childcare work of their shared son. So district court ordered, basically ruled in favor when she filed this complaint, and granted 50,000 yuan, which is about 7,700 US dollars, for the 5 years of their marriage, plus the monthly alimony and the half of their shared property. Of course, when you think about $7,000 over 5 years for all the domestic work done, it's peanuts, really. Yeah. I mean, and it's actually, someone did the math, it would be equivalent to 250 hours of work at minimum wage, which is nothing. It's less than 1 hour a day. Raising a child takes a lot more than that. But what's interesting here is that it sets a precedent. It's the first time it's ever happened. And it's also the fruit of the first civil code that came out last year. It was heavily debated in last year's 2 sessions, and then was finally adopted by the National People's Congress in May of last year. And just so you know, it was the 5th attempt since the founding of the PRC to launch a civil code, because basically especially since the 80s, legislation is done by a piece-by-piece approach. So each civil law, whether it's about property, personal rights, or marriage, things like that are passed as standalone pieces of legislation. So for the first time, there's a civil code that allows you to codify laws around these kinds of issues, civil laws. And so this ruling has significance especially for women, not just in China, but everywhere. Thinking about how much of the, let's say, global economy is fueled by the unpaid work that women do. So one of the things we also cited here is there was an Oxfam report last year that was quoted and I would recommend anyone who's watching here, Tricontinental, that we also are both researchers for, the Institute for Social Research, came out with an amazing study called Patriarchy Corona Shock a few months ago, that traces in part the amount of unpaid care work, especially in this pandemic era. But that being said, the Oxfam report that cited 75% of the world's unpaid care work, so that's raising children or cleaning your house or cooking, caring for elders, all of that is done by women. And it would be equivalent to contributing to the global economy 10.8 trillion US dollars. So that's just to give it some frame of reference. That's 3 times the global tech industry.
China's GDP was around $14 trillion last year. So it's almost a China.
I wonder if that's based on just like the cost of labor or what it enables the other partner in that family partnership to do. Because if you look at, can you? I lost you there for a second. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Your camera there is loading. But anyways, I'll continue. This might take a second to reload. Yeah, in the U.S., if you look at Jeff Bezos' divorce, his wife got a very, very big settlement. I'm not sure if it went through court or not, but the underlying principle was that he was able to do what he did because of her, contributions to the family. And they took more of an approach of what became possible for the family rather than what was her labor worth, what were the hours worth.
Sure.
Okay, sorry about that. We lost each other for a second. But what I was just wondering, just off the top of my head, was I wonder if they look at that contribution from a labor point of view, like how much was that labor worth? Because if you look at the U.S. with Jeff Bezos' divorce, his wife got a huge settlement, and I think it was more based on the principle of what was possible within that family because she did all that part of the work, and then so she also got a share of basically what he built because she was an integral part of that. So it'd be interesting to see if it's valued in that way. Because there was who was telling me there was a famous it was on a podcast I was listening to. I think it was in Germany. I can't remember the exact details, but there was a famous scientist who invented a bunch of things And his wife was, I'm sure there's going to be some viewers who are going to know who it is. His wife was a famous doctor or scientist or something like that. She was on the cusp of all sorts of things, but after she got married, she basically gave that up to take care of the family at home. And she could have accomplished so much if she continued on as well. So yeah,
Mhm.
we're saying a step, but probably be. We're losing each other again. But
Yeah.
no, but probably needs to still a little bit more work to go. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely the aspect in terms of like the, let's say, the reproduction of life, like every aspect, right? From like rearing the child, giving birth, or giving the birth to the child, rearing the child, to taking care of the parents, to all the types of things that are involved in making the society run that's not remunerated in dollars or in yuan in this case. And um, one of the things I think is interesting to look at this when you're comparing it with the U.S. too, which has much more of a culture of litigation and where a culture of like prenuptial agreements exists. Here in China, that's not the case. So when a kind of post divorce situation happens, and there are ways that potentially a woman could ask for remuneration, it's a pretty big victory. And with this, in terms of thinking about how the legal aspect has been central to the advances of women's rights in China. And just a little quick tidbit note is that the first law that was ever adopted after the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949 was the marriage law in 1950. So it was already from the beginning look at how to challenge patriarchal marriage traditions, things like age of marriage, to consent to marriage, to all kinds of things that I think through the history of these last decades has been part of the advancements of women. And so within this of the International Women's Day issue or a special, we also highlighted many of these kind of key advances that we found were pretty fascinating, especially in the last 25 years. Marco, do you want to tell some of those?
Yeah. No, just one quick comment about this court decision is that also it's historical because it probably can set a sort of I don't know how to call this
Precedent, yeah.
a precedent for many other cases. Not only, I mean, of course, in China, but this debate it's also increasing and getting stronger in many other countries of the world. So it's also interesting to see what is the repercussions of this decision in the next months and years. But anyway, so just briefly.
Sorry, guys, we lost each other again. Sorry, go ahead. You were going to mention so briefly, and then you can continue from there.
You mean the data? You got some of the data?
Yeah,
or?
Yeah. I got to the point where you said so briefly, and then yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So some of the very the most important achievements of women that women were able to struggle and fight for and achieve in the last 25 years. For instance, in terms of illiteracy, so in 1995, there was 24.1% of illiterate women in China. This now dropped to 7.5%, only 7.5% in the last year. So maternal mortality also dropped from 61.9 for 100,000 to 18.3 to 100,000 in the last 25 years. So this is a drop of 2/3. It's also it's a big progress. And also in education, if you see right now, and between undergraduate and graduate students, the numbers almost doubled in this period. And today, women make up the majority of students in all the levels of higher education. And also the life expectancy increased 8.9 years, reaching now 79.4 years of life expectancy for women in China today. So this is like a very big accomplishment of the struggle of the women in the last years.
I just want to make a note about life expectancy is just that as a measurement, as an indicator, it's something that in comparisons with any Western advanced nations, the life expectancy compared to its state of economic growth far outstrips, when you're talking about European countries, the North America and all of that, because life expectancy is actually an encapsulation of various factors from social to economic to environmental. It's kind of the plus and the minuses put together. And as an indicator, it's like to arrive at nearly 80 years old when at the turn of like 7 years ago was only 32 years. I mean, it's something incredible to imagine. But anyways, sorry, just
Yeah,
interjection.
but then comes the challenges. The challenges is also very related um, to the lack of leadership, or the lack of women.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with this. This is acting up,
Uh,
but yeah, I got to the point where you were saying, yeah, it's a massive increase in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. This is actually a little bit of context also. That this is actually a source of conflict for China as well, also, because although Islam in China is quite progressive in terms of it's one of the only countries in the world to have a long history of female imams and female mosques and things like that. The people who do want to take a more extreme interpretation of Islam, which includes kind of the oppression of women and not giving them a choice, setting them up with who the parents want them to marry, and not giving them a chance to go out and work. This is where a conflict happens between China and religion, and I'm not going to take a stance on whether that's right or wrong that China should go in, but they don't want to leave any women behind, and that includes women who are living under a religious pretext, a more extreme interpretation of it, as I said also, and so when they come in, they say no, no, you're not allowed to do this. It is really a source for a lot of conflict, especially for activists outside who are promoting a more kind of Sharia law, kind of more extreme
Mm,
interpretation of it. And it's a lot of context that's lost out in the Xinjiang discussion also.
yeah.
But just before we go on too, I want to mention the lady who I was talking about. I just looked it up. It was Clara Immerwahr. And she was the
Ah,
first German woman to be awarded a doctorate in chemistry in Germany. Um,
mm,
and she's known as a women's rights activist. But I believe she basically quit all of her work to support her husband, Fritz Haber, who did some really amazing things in the beginning, which was figure out how to produce ammonia, basically a chemical process to create ammonia, which was, I believe, used as a fertilizer. And it was in the face of sanctions against the U.S. that he managed to do that. Now, unfortunately, later on, he also ended up being the person who basically invented chemical weapons, gassing out entire forces in the field by releasing chemical gases, upwind from them. So he worked with the Nazis and everything like that. But she ended up, Clara Immerwahr, she ended up shooting herself in the chest when he came home from one of his visits. Like he was out all the time traveling on business, and he was like, I guess he was just like, oh, all right. So he went back to work the next day, creating more chemical weapons. The timeline might be a little bit
wow.
off, but that was who I was talking about. Very, very interesting story. And I think that's why a lot of people celebrate her in Germany. Also, was in terms of being this person who gave up her life. She had so much potential, but she gave up her life to take care of the family, and that's something I think people should appreciate a lot more for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly, of course, the history of millions of women, right?
Yeah.
So this is, by the way, just to finish the point of the this last 25 years, the biggest
Mm-hmm.
challenge, right, still is women in leading positions, both in economy, in companies, but also politically. So, for instance, women in China, they make up now 43.5% of the workforce, but they only make up 25% of the leading positions of the companies. Same with political representation. They are around 25. I think this year they said it was 27% of the deputies in the National People's Congress. But it's already better than 20 years ago when they had um, less than 20%.
yeah, it's about
Yeah,
20%. It's been
yeah,
about 20% increase
yeah.
since the
But
slow.
one good news is that if you get the deputies born after 1990, or which means like people who are like 32 and less than that, two-thirds of the deputies are women. So there's some hope, and I mean probably the awareness of the situation is also growing. Women, I'm speaking up much more. You can see like in many debates in civil society of China right now. So, but this is one of the challenges that remain for the women issue in the country.
Yeah. I see
Um,
when people are talking about, one of the main spokespersons for the China Foreign Relations is a female, and people take her just as
Hua
seriously as
Chunying,
anybody else. It's oh yeah, she's great.
she's great.
Big fan of her, and she
you'll
says it like
see
it is.
when you
She
add in the video, you'll see her.
oh really? Okay. So yeah, just
Yeah,
like I'm talking like constantly producing mic drop moments. And
exactly.
but yeah. What I'd really like to see is I'd like to see the China Politburo Standing Committee have a woman on it, because obviously that is
Yeah,
there's not a single woman on that yet. That would be a
no,
nice piece of progress when we see that happen.
absolutely.
I mean, I think we're on the over the hour mark. I know we had some interruptions, but I want to end on an anecdote since I think we all spent some time in the countryside the last couple of weeks.
Hmm.
Mm.
But kind of end off on some of the, the more we can say statistics. Statistics can be impressive, but there's
Yeah,
nothing like actually talking to, especially rural women,
absolutely.
and seeing what the advances are. I mean, and so I had the fortunate experience of going to Guizhou this last week.
Mm.
And just for viewers to know, I mean, this is Southwestern Province, is one of the poorest in the country. And it's also where the last 9 poverty-stricken counties were lifted out of the 832 in the poverty alleviation campaign, right? So I got to visit one of those counties that were lifted, and also one of the relocation settlements where over 18,000 people were relocated, talked to the people there, people who were lifted and also did the lifting. But fascinating to see the kind of conjuncture of many factors to specifically uplift women, like how industry is used, or how tech or e-commerce platforms are used, uh, ecotourism, education. So it's really a convergence of like the whole society that has to come together to make this happen. So I talked to this one woman who was just lovely. She's from an ethnic minority group in one of the villages, and Miss Liu. So she was connected through this e-commerce platform that has trained rural peasants to create short video content. So how it works is it's for every minute of video watched, you have a credit system. There's 10 credits given, 6 to the content producer, so the woman herself, 1 to the viewer, so there's some incentive, and then the rest are split between they have like little video production centers in the villages, and also the village committee. So the most goes to the content creator. So what these credits allow is that they can trade goods. So you have urban middle class people who are watching these videos that want healthy food from the countryside, so they can go get their nice vegetables, green, etc. And then rural peasants get to get appliances. So with their, we sent scrolling through her feed for like dozens and dozens of things she traded on credit for making videos, including things that we don't even have actually. Like I was like, I really want that hot pot thing you have. Like that's what I need. I need to make more videos. We need to start working on this, Daniel.
Yes.
Like I really want
Yeah.
that hot pot. And then microwaves, rice cookers, and I mean, saying it, making a joke out of it, but linking back to this like domestic labor question. What we were talking about, how much time these appliances save in her life. These are like really material,
Yeah.
have material consequences in her life. And one of the amazing things that she's doing now, that she should, I could barely use a cell phone before, and now I'm making videos, like they're really fantastic stuff. And her and her family and whole village, and her neighbors came together and wrote, directed, and starred in an episode of a TV drama. I was really impressed. Like they made all the costumes they did, like the production quality was really high. And she's like, I'm like, who watches? Like everyone in the village, everyone in the town. Like this is just the thing. And what I think is important is that, in terms of, we've talked a lot about poverty alleviation, but especially about women's advances here in this moment, is that you could just see how the kind of human creativity, the expression, the confidence and dignity given in the process of the poverty alleviation program, which is not handouts. It's not just about government handouts. It's
Mm.
about, exactly like Ms. Liu, this process of also participating in their own uplifting out of poverty, which is just touching and fantastic to see. And also the just the utter excitement to share their life stories, but also at the same time they get a cool rice cooker, and that means that they actually spend more time to be able to do leisurely things like direct and star in like TV dramas
They
that
can,
the
yeah.
village gets to come together. Great.
Once you have your basic needs, then you can really explore your creative passions and interests. I remember in Tibet also there was this herdswoman, and she has, she uploads to Douyin. She's got Douyin videos of her herding her sheep and stuff like that. She's got a bunch of fans. I think she does. I'm not sure if there's a credit system involved. I think she just does it for fun. And there were a few YouTubers that went together to, I think it was Xi'an, and they went to a small village where they were doing Douyin videos for their, promoting the vegetables and stuff like that. And they were having so much fun. It was really, really cool. And that's, it was also part of the poverty alleviation stuff as well. On the Tibet side, I remember same kind of story. I can't remember what it was, if it was a machine for making cheese or something like that. But they were basically these small, insignificant pieces of equipment that gave them so much extra free time. Where this herdswoman now can play Douyin and, make some videos of her own or go out, hang out with her friends or whatever. It's amazing to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
So yeah, that's part of being like human beings, right? Like people want to also have fun, expressive. It's not just about, toil and labor all day. So this is what, when we bring in all the statistics about the achievements of women and of the society coming together, that's part of it. Knowing there's a lot to struggle forward for, it's never ending work.
Yeah.
And then creating a situation where these people can contribute towards society in a more meaningful way. I think the same thing goes for the West, is when they developed, when they industrialized, when they got to a point where your basic needs were looked after. All of a sudden you had and this was actually just the evolution of humans as well, where everybody had their own piece of land, everybody was farmers, everybody had to look after themselves. But all of a sudden, when you had a situation where people could move to the cities, and all of a sudden the farms were supporting the cities, you created a society where people could suddenly start doing more creative things.
Exactly.
And we're going to see a lot of the same things happen for a lot of these people who probably would have never dreamed of doing something like this. So yeah, no, it's good. And I think that was our last story, right?
Yep.
That's it. That was good. Yeah, we still,
our shows seem to get longer and longer. What's happening?
Minute by minute. I think once we cut out those parts where the signal chopped out, I think we're still going to be at an hour. We just can't do it in any less. But what I'll do is I'll probably put a guide underneath. I think I did that for one of the other videos about what we're.
Yeah, that's great. That helps a lot.
Works well.
Yeah, sounds good. And so I don't think there's any pina coladas planned for next week. So I think we're on for next week, right? We should do another episode next week.
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
That sounds good. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you on the next show.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thanks, Daniel.
Bye.